Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and I've been having Larry Bernard on pretty regularly on the channel. He's an independent, comic writer, contributor to multiple YouTube channels. I believe he runs his own YouTube channel. We've been talking a lot about, what's at the heart of the character, or maybe what modern day storytelling is missing, and we're going to cover that a little bit in more depth today. Take a little bit of a different angle. How you doing, Larry?
I'm doing pretty great. I was talking to a friend of mine, Jeff Gomez, who runs a company called Starlight Runner. They do a lot of discussions with studios about various things. He's worked for a few companies you might have heard of, like Disney or Marvel. Little small companies like that. Just tiny companies you've probably heard of.
Startup.
Little startups. And I talked to him a little bit about the topic we're going to have today, and what he calls this topic is derivation of brand essence. That studios, they don't know how to do the brand essence, so we get their hot takes, which often have little to do with the core ethos, values, integrity, and lore of the original story, and the original characters, and the original world. And so we just get warmed up things. But just like when you take your leftovers in the microwave a few times, it's not going to taste as good as it did that first time.
Yeah, they've been doing this. There's almost no want to do anything original in entertainment anymore. That even goes to comic books. It's certainly in movies where it's constant reboots or reimagining of characters. I remember that Conan the Barbarian reboot was just awful. You had great casting of Jason Momoa as Conan the Barbarian, but they decided to turn the movie into a spectacle, rather than a character arc. With good, solid storytelling throughout. It was just spectacle. And they do that with everything. I remember they did a reboot of Total Recall and just completely missed the mark on what the actual story was about. They thought it was about cool sci-fi visuals, and it wasn't about a man's journey of self-discovery.
Yeah, that story was very different than the Arnold movie. The Arnold movie focused on what was core to that story and core to that character. And core has kind of been a thing that I was using sort of in my mind as the metaphor for what I'm wanting to talk about today, because I've been working out at the gym and I've been having to focus a lot on my core, because if your core is not right, you're not going to bend your knees right. You're not going to bend your knees right. You're going to injure yourself. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to have a bad time. That's really what is happening with these new franchises. So I picked out 3 case studies that are obvious and that everybody would know about. We're going to talk about Star Trek first, because they have Star Trek Picard, which is miserable. People are watching it, but it's a miserable product. So the essence of Star Trek is in the characters. You see what Gene Roddenberry was going for. You have somebody from the American North and Captain James Kirk. You have Bones McCoy, who's from the American South, but he's also McCoy of the Hatfields and McCoy fame. So it's from like the rural South, the mountains. You have Spock, who's a half-breed, who's also coded Jewish because of some of the symbolism Spock uses. And of course, Leonard Nimoy's Jewish. You have a person of color who represents Africa. You have a European and Scotty. Of course, Chekhov the Russian, representing the Cold War in Russia we were fighting. You have Sulu representing Asia and Japan. It's about all the things that divide us. They're gone in the future. It's not just the journey of exploration that makes Star Trek Star Trek. It's the things that we struggle with on a daily basis: racism, poverty, sexism, political divisions, war. Those are all gone. So we're free to have purely human exploration, which made it terrible for the people who were telling the stories, because what do you mean our characters can't argue? Well, what do you mean people can't, grieve through death? But it's a utopian science fiction that says the stuff you're struggling with today, that's all going to go away. So let's talk about what the world would be like if the stuff we struggle with today is gone. How we could explore, and how what we have as our core human lessons can be applied to people who haven't made it past those struggles. Now, that's the core to the fans. And that's what built up the decades of passionate fan base for Star Trek. The fan conventions, once those happened, Viacom, which was Paramount at the time, had the rights to Star Trek. There were these fan conventions going on all over the world. Gene Roddenberry had been trying to pitch a second TV show, and they said, you know what, let's do a movie. And then the Star Trek movies took off, and then the fan base got bigger. And then they said, okay, let's do the next generation. That was the core of what made Star Trek engaging to the audience. However, the vision of Gene Roddenberry was very strict, very structured, and so they started peeling away from that. The first time you saw that was in Deep Space Nine. In Deep Space Nine, they said, okay, we're going to take this world, but what's this world like if there's an existential war? An existential war threat that they can't handle. And that was fine. We didn't get away from the core of the story. We got really compelling Star Trek. Then they got Star Trek Voyager, like I said, okay, what if terrorists who are part of this world have to work with the people from the Federation, and they're in a completely unknown section of space? And that was when it started to break apart, because it wasn't about the utopian science fiction. It wasn't about the quest for discovery and exploration of this society of humans that have finally figured their stuff out. And then we went to Enterprise, where humans have just gotten past that initial hurdle, and they're still kind of jerks to each other. And then Star Trek Discovery, people are using the F-bomb all the time. There's discrimination and weird sex stuff going on. And Star Trek is now a hot mess. So we look at Ghostbusters, and I don't give Ghostbusters the same sort of rating on this sort of evaluation, because the people who made Ghostbusters initially, they didn't get it right the second time, because the second Ghostbusters movie wasn't really good. But what's at the core of Ghostbusters?
Well, it's a group of nerds getting together and creating a science and tackling a problem that no one thinks is real, while everyone telling them they're crazy. They're essentially the heroes. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
it's good comedy.
It's also a blue collar ethos kind of story, because they're guys wearing jumpsuits. They're not your typical white collar nerdy guys. And it's a story about how all this hate and fear gets washed away by love and hope and redemption and, the humanity of New York City, which they kind of went a little overboard in the second movie. Ghostbusters 2016 comes around. What do they make it about? It's a superhero movie and feminism. So because they didn't have an established core and they were just trying to riff off of jokes, the whole thing fell apart and became a giant epic internet mess. You know what the core of that 2016 story was supposed to be all about? Bullying. The scientists were being bullied. The villain was being bullied. So that was supposed to be the through line of the whole movie. But you don't get that, because that's not the core of Ghostbusters. So it's another story living in Ghostbusters' skin. So of course the audience rebelled against that. And so the capstone for all this is the new Star Wars. The core of what made everybody passionate about Star Wars was it's a mythological story. It is a very strong distillation of the classic hero's journey by Joseph Campbell. And instead of using mythology, it takes classic 50s and 60s sci-fi tropes and elements and Japanese samurai cinema and stuff that George Lucas really loved and really had a passion for, and it puts it all together. And we feel George's passion for those things through the movie. We connect to George. George connects to things he loves in the movie. And the studio, it was the right movie at the right time, and it found a massive audience. So what's the core of Disney Star Wars other than to make Disney approximately $1 billion per film?
I think that the new trilogy was meant to move the franchise off of the old characters. It felt like that was what the movies were about.
Right. So it's all about money.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, everything collapses, because that's the problem. Is that there's a core not just for the audience, there's also a core for the studio. When Star Wars came out, another little product you might have heard of called Dungeons and Dragons came out. Another little product you might have heard of called video games became popular. There are all these sort of things that were adjacent in what we now know of as the nerd pop culture sphere, were all happening at that point in the 1970s. So Star Wars was the right product to fit into that sweet spot in the marketplace. So while the studios saw it as a risky venture, they also knew that there was a good chance that this was actually going to work. That was the core for the studios, was to hit that market spot. All the studios care about right now is, can we make $1 billion to $2 billion off these movies? Can we
Yeah.
make a streaming service show to make sure we get 1 million subscribers? Let's think about comic books for a moment. So, what character would you say they've completely lost the script on? She-Hulk. Let's talk about She-Hulk as a character they've completely lost the script on. So, She-Hulk originally was a kind of mousy woman who became a She-Hulk. And then John Byrne, in his epic storytelling thing, said, you know what? A Hulk changes back and forth. What if Jen didn't? What if she just one day got stuck as being She-Hulk? And then in that, I think it was actually like just a straight graphic novel where it actually happened in. And Reed Richards said to her, "Oh, I'm so sorry you're stuck like that." And she's like, "Oh, okay. So you're saying I'm just extremely physically attractive, superhumanly strong, and I'm just green. But I'm still me. I'm still smart. I'm still, successful. Yeah, okay, whatever, Reed." And that was the core of the character. It was how she went through a journey, became self confident, became self reliant. What are they trying to do? Well, we need to diversify the Hulk brand so women relate to it more. So let's make her full of PTSD and have a fight with a YouTube food critic. I mean, there's tons of other examples. Like, you know what Batman needs to do? He needs to punch his foster son in the face.
Hey,
That
those were
that's
slap signals.
But I
Yes.
mean, it's
What would make Superman the best father in the world? Letting his insane father come down, take his son without putting up a fight, and then letting his wife go as well. And just
yeah,
not caring. Be like, oh yeah, you can take him off into space, even though you're insane. Just do it.
just do it.
Nothing to go
Just
wrong.
just do it. And audiences aren't connecting to these characters that don't have any core. They don't have any fundamental essence that grounds them into something the audience cares about. And the publishing companies, the movie companies, they don't have something core they're trying to do with these characters. They just view them as a bag of money. So since they just
Mhm.
view them as a bag of money, they can't make any editorial or publishing or production decisions that elevates the art. Nobody's
They
doing
just
a
make
good job.
decisions on budgets and how many action scenes you're going to get.
Yep. And that's what I mean by the analogy and the metaphor of it's like your core when you're exercising. If the core is not right, all the other muscle groups are going to get thrown off. That's where we're at with as a sort of a broader contextual thing of when characters go wrong, when stories go wrong, when there's really bad tropes and writing techniques going wrong. It's because there's not a core of what's this all supposed to be about. So Mr. Miracle is head of the new gods and he's fighting a war with Darkseid. So what's this story going to be about? Oh, it's going to be about him going through a midlife crisis and his wife having a baby and him completely losing his mind. Really, Tom? That's the story you wanted to tell with Mr. Miracle?
Well, it's always the Tom story with the Tom King written with the Tom King written comic book. It's just a story about him basically as the superhero failing.
But a strong woman is there to help him,
Always.
always. And there's no core, there's no story. And we talked about Brian Hill with his Batman and the Outsiders run. He's got a core story. It's about leadership, it's about people mentoring people, it's about a team leader in Batman who's trying to bring his whole family up, and his polar opposite in Ra's al Ghul, who's trying to be a more aggressive, everyone is out for themselves sort of team, and the conflict of those two ideological issues. There's a core to those kind of stories, and that's why those stories have a very passionate fan base out there.
Yeah, even with like Hawkman, when you look at what Robert Venditti did with that character, he took all these fragmented pieces of history because he had such a convoluted history, and he was able to string them all together and just capture the essence and elevate the character by respecting where he came from. It's almost like a love letter to what all those other people did before him.
And if you look at the core of a character, cores of characters change. Like, for example, Batman used to have a gun. Batman used to kill people. But then they realized, wait, no, that's actually kind of terrible. This character shouldn't be killing people. He should be opposed to killing people. And he should most definitely be opposed to killing people with guns because his parents were killed with a gun. And so the core of the character changed. Peter Parker had a core where he was a single guy who was kind of a luckless loser. But then they said, you know what? Let's give Peter a love of his life in Mary Jane Watson Parker. We gave him a love of his life in Gwen Stacy. She died. He mourned. He went through a troubled period. Let's have him have that perfect moment of love in his life so that elevates all the rest of the core elements of Peter Parker because you can get through these things. You can
Hmm.
still retain who you are if you've become successful in something, which is why the whole billionaire Peter Parker story really had a potential that Marvel was never able to get off the ground because they didn't have a core for who Peter Parker was. So, like, imagine, if you will, billionaire Spider Man. He's on the Avengers. Peter Parker says, I've been at this superhero thing for like 20 years. Maybe I'm actually good at it. Maybe I'm not this loser. And then we have to say, okay, well, who is Peter if he's not this hapless loser? Who is Peter if he's this rock star superhero guy? What's core to Peter Parker? So then you tell a story where you say, okay, this is core to who he is. This other stuff, it was important, but now this is the important part we want you to focus on. And that's how you use deconstruction of a character effectively. You use it to focus on the elements of their core that matter so that you elevate the character. You make the stories deeper, more meaningful, and have a deeper connection to people.
Yeah, the one that just jumps right in my head is the change that Dan Jurgens did with the end of the New 52 before they did Rebirth, when we find out Superman goes to another planet where he's kind of depowered. He and Lois are able to have a child for the first time, and when he comes back and they do Rebirth, he's a father now. It just
Yeah,
completely changes the essence of the character. He's still who he is at the core, but he's completely fleshed out and made more whole because now he's a father, and you're going to see what it's like for Superman to be a father and how he's going to impart all the things that he learned from his father and his mother onto Jonathan Kent. And it just made him a better, more fully realized character.
it took his paragonness and took it to an entirely new level. You could change the core of the character a little bit and make the character stronger, but you can't hollow out the core of a character and make it a better character or make it a better book or make it a better movie or a better show. So I soft announced it. I will, on my birthday, set up the mailing list launch for my book. So once we get to that point, I will do a little bit of a teaser pre-launch with you with some of the stuff. Just the end of the year, I wanted to start earlier, but the end of 2019, finances kind of crunched into me, changed my job a little bit at work, so that changed my money. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking forward to, in the next month, saying, hey, here's the book I'm going to be launching
Well, okay. Well, what's your birthday? When can people
March
be expecting that?
16th. March
March
16th. So
16th.
sometime around March 16th, I'll have a mailing list up and ready to go. And I'll be starting probably the end of this month, giving Jason some of the money to start getting pages made because I don't want to launch the actual Indiegogo until I get 8 pages into it. And my
Mm-hmm.
current plan, although I know there's controversy about that amongst some of the people, is I want to start with the Indiegogo platform because I think that's the audience that I have a better framework on. But after that gets to enough of a point to sell the comic, I then want to try to pitch it to the Kickstarter because those are two different independent comics audiences.
Well, Larry, I appreciate you giving us a little bit of a heads up, maybe a little sneak peek, a little teaser on what's coming up in the weeks ahead with your comic book. I want to thank you very much for coming on and talking about the core of characters and how studios and comic books have kind of lost their way. Is there one last thing you wanted to mention that we needed to say before we wrap this up?
Thank God Dan Didio's fired. Thank God Dan Didio's fired.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
All right, lady. I'll talk to you later, buddy.
Yeah, it'll take a little bit for me to kind of chew down some streaming series to kind of get a good outline of why streaming series are terrible and why Netflix and Amazon need to stop or they won't be getting my money anymore.
All right. Well, I can't wait to talk about that one because I've been frustrated for like 9 months now.
Yeah. All right. Talk to you later.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.